Hey everybody, this is Miss Devanchi. So today we are going to be working on 11 vocabulary words for Reconstruction. Of course, Reconstruction is going to be the time period right after the Civil War. So we've gotten through the Civil War. General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox. Unfortunately, Abe Lincoln is going to be assassinated about a week after at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. And so his vice president, Andrew Johnson, is going to become the president. And so Reconstruction is going to last from 1865 until 1877. Okay. So Reconstruction is the rebuilding. So think about what it means to reconstruct. So re means again, construct means build. So we're building up again. In this case, we're going to be building our country up again. Remember, we had those states that seceded from the Union. We had the slave states that decided to stay, but everyone is angry at each other. And the South is a little upset that they lost. So it's going to be very important that this Reconstruction time period goes very well. Okay. So it's the rebuilding and reunification of the North and South. Okay. There again, my bad. I forgot to put Reconstruction here, but Reconstruction, that's what this is the rebuilding and reunification of the North and South after the Civil War. Okay. Now, within this Reconstruction time period, think about the election of 1860. Who won the election of 1860? Hopefully you answered Abe Lincoln. Crossing my fingers, you answered Abe Lincoln. Well, what political party was Abraham Lincoln from? The Republicans. Now, unfortunately, we have radical Republicans right after during Reconstruction. And the reason they were called radical Republicans is because their goal was immediate eradication of slavery. Sorry, guys, my dog's in the window. I was just taking a quick look at her. All right. So the radical Republicans, their goal there again is immediate eradication, or they want to do away with slavery immediately. So as soon as the last shots were fired, as soon as the Civil War is done, slavery should be abolished. That was their goal for the radical Republicans. Now, there again, think about it. Republicans. Abe Lincoln was a Republican. Remember that for when we get down to the Wade Davis bill. Okay. So their goal was immediate eradication, or the stoppage of immediate eradication of slavery. All right. So our next one, unfortunately, well, let's go back to radical Republicans. Unfortunately, these radical Republicans were opposed by Abe Lincoln. And like I said, think about Abe Lincoln. Think about the fact that he won the election and then the South got so upset. Well, these radical Republicans were Abe Lincoln multiplied by a million. I mean, the Southerners hated radical Republicans. Okay. All right. Our next one, the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, think about the word freedmen. Who do you think this bureau was made for? Hopefully you said free African Americans, because that's mostly why this bureau was organized. So we're going to put former slaves. But it was also an effort to help those Southerners who were displaced by the war. Remember, the war is taking place the majority of the time in the South. We talked about the fact that sometimes when hospitals cropped up in your house, you had to be kicked out, or maybe you just deserted. You didn't want to live there anymore. You were scared. There was battle all over, so you were displaced from your home. So the Freedmen's Bureau was mainly for former slaves, excuse me, but also included white Southerners. And there again, the Freedmen's Bureau was to provide food, shelter, schools, legal assistance, and then there again, that's going to include former slaves and also white Southerners. Okay. Our next one, the Wade-Davis Bill. And this is the one I said, hey, remember that about President Lincoln. Okay. So the Wade-Davis Bill required 50% of Southern white males. So required 50% of Southern white males to take an oath of loyalty to the Union. Okay, remember, so these white males in the South, they just fought a war. They wanted to keep slavery. And so this Wade-Davis Bill required 50% of all white males to take an oath saying, hey, yes, I know we just lost the war, but we are going to take this oath of loyalty. Sorry. This oath of loyalty, and we are going to be loyal to the Union. Okay. Now, if they took this oath of loyalty and at least 50% of them did, they would be admitted back into the Union. So what do y'all think would happen if these states didn't have this many men take the oath of loyalty? Do you think they would be admitted back into the Union? Now, some of you say yes, some of you say no. It would have been nice if I could tell you the answer, but we'll never know because guess who vetoed this bill? Oh, and by the way, this bill also would have required states to allow African Americans the right to vote. I know it seems I'm a little all over the place right now. So the Wade-Davis Bill required 50% of Southern white males to take this oath of loyalty, to be admitted back into the Union. It was also going to require states to allow African Americans the right to vote. There again, I wish I had the answer to you if they did have 50% or not, but we'll never know because Abraham Lincoln vetoed this bill. So obviously this bill came about before he was assassinated. Okay, so he vetoed this bill. So it didn't make 50% of the men take that oath of loyalty. It also did not require the Southern states to allow African Americans the right to vote. Now, tomorrow when we talk about the 3 different amendments, we'll talk about the amendment that allowed African Americans the right to vote. However, with everything, we're going to see that these black codes started popping up, these Jim Crow laws. And even though the amendment was passed and it was added to the Constitution, unfortunately, there were going to be different things that each state put in place to not allow African Americans the right to vote. So the Wade-Davis Bill was a grand thing, but there again, it was vetoed by Abe Lincoln, so it never came to fruition. All right. Our next one is the word carpetbagger. And that's actually a derogatory term. Hopefully y'all know what derogatory means. It means bad, okay? But a carpetbagger is a northerner. So a Yankee, those Yanks up in the north, okay? The northerners who came down to take advantage of those in the South after the Civil War. Now, this could have been politically. Oh, let me finish. Hold up. Advantage. So it could have been politically. So there again, think about the South. Are they going to want to put Southerners in charge? No, because they're afraid if they put Southerners in charge who were in charge before the war, it's just going to go back to the same thing. So these Northerners are going to come down from the North to try to take advantage of them, whether it be capitalistic or if it be politically. Okay. Then we have another derogatory term called a scalawag. And actually, you might have heard both of these, maybe not necessarily in the way that we're using it, but people still use these words today. So a scalawag. So if a carpetbagger was a Northerner who came down to the South to take advantage of them, what do you think a scalawag is? Hopefully you said a Southerner who tries to take advantage of their, excuse me, Southerner who tries to take advantage of their neighbors, per se. There again, it's going to be politically or it's going to be capitalistic. Remember, the South is in ruins. So they might come down and they might start rebuilding areas, and they're going to charge an enormous price to help rebuild those areas. Okay. So is that right? No. So that's why they were given this name scalawag. Because if you're a Southerner, you're supposed to want to help your brother or sister, per se, to help them get out of this. Okay. Now, our next two terms are going to be very similar. Okay. So please make sure that you try to pay attention as to the very small difference. So once the war is over, former enslaved African Americans aren't going to go out and be able to just to find a job to be a lawyer or a doctor. There again, there's still going to be prejudice. There's still going to be discrimination. And one of the only jobs they might be able to find, of course, is going to be working in the fields. Why do I say that? Because the majority of enslaved Africans were working in the fields. They were working on the plantations. If not, the women might be working in the home, cooking or cleaning or taking care of the children. So we have the term sharecropper or sharecropping. And a sharecropper is when a family rents a small piece of land and then after they grow their crops, they're going to give a portion of those crops. Now, the thing about a sharecropper is they don't really have say in the crop that's grown. They don't really have a say in too much other than planting, harvesting, and then giving some of those crops away. So a family rents a small piece of land, give crops as payment. Now, sadly, the amount of crops that they need as payment is going to keep going up. And some people actually called this slavery after the Civil War because they can never actually get out of debt from the people that they rented their farm from. And so they had to keep working and working and working, and they were never able to better themselves by being a sharecropper. The next one is a tenant farmer. Now, this one, they're also a farmer. They're also renting a piece of land. However, they actually have say in what they want to farm. And once they harvest those crops, they can sell the crops and then get that money and then give the farmer some money. So they're not actually giving the crops to the farmer. Whew. All right, so rent a piece of land, make their own decisions, and then gave money. So there again, very similar. A sharecropper rents land, doesn't really have a lot of say, and they give crops as payment. Tenant farmers rent pieces of land. They kind of make their own decisions, and they give money instead. Okay. All righty, keeping moving. So our next one, actually our next three, have to do with the types of things that happened to the African Americans, afterwards, after the war, okay? Our first one is Jim Crow laws. How many of you have heard of Jim Crow laws before? Have any of you heard of Jim Crow laws? Do any of you know where Jim Crow gets his name? So I don't know if you know what a minstrel is. It's like a little sideshow. But back in the day, they would have these little theaters, and they would have a white person playing a black person, and they would have their face painted black, and they would call him Jim Crow. And so Jim Crow is not actually a person, but it is something that is supposed to be derogatory in representing African Americans. And so these Jim Crow laws are not going to be good laws. Okay, so they are state and local. So state is the entire state, so all of North Carolina. Local would be the city, so Elizabeth City. So state, North Carolina, local, Elizabeth City. So make sure we understand it's not federal, and each state has their own different Jim Crow laws and their black codes. We'll get to that in a second, okay? So state and local laws excuse me, that legalize segregation. Can anyone tell me? Look, y'all aren't even here. What is segregation? And even if we're not talking about race, what does it mean to segregate something? It means you're separating something based on a specific characteristic. Now, in this case, Jim Crow laws, they are segregating by the characteristic of race. Okay? So state and local laws that legalize segregation. Okay, so they make it legal to have segregated areas. So places where you eat, places you go to church, bathrooms. Okay, so Jim Crow laws is what made that happen. All right, then we have something coined black codes. And we're going to look more at these different black codes within different states because each state had their own black codes. But these are laws governing the conduct of African Americans. Now, unfortunately, these black codes, when it says laws governing the conduct of African Americans, these black codes are going to prevent African Americans from owning property. They're not going to be able to conduct their own business. They're not going to be able to move freely. Can't move freely throughout public property. Maybe that's what I should say. Now, what made it easy for these two things to pop up is Plessy versus Ferguson. And that is our last word, Plessy versus Ferguson. Have any of you heard of this court case, Plessy versus Ferguson? Now, I know Plessy versus Ferguson was a little bit out of our time period of Reconstruction. 1896. But black codes and Jim Crow laws were still going on. And so Plessy was a gentleman who was 7/8 white. So he was almost white. And the trail cars, the railroad cars, the train cars, they were segregated based on the Jim Crow laws and the black codes. And Plessy decided he was going to sit in the white section because he's 7/8 white. They arrested him because he wouldn't move out of that. And he said, I deserve to be here. I deserve to be in the white section. Well, when he went to court, the court it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in that Supreme Court decision, it simply stated that, yes, we understand that you were 7/8 white, but segregation is legal. So the Plessy versus Ferguson. So Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896. So there again, this is a little bit out of our time period. This was a Supreme Court decision. And in this Supreme Court decision, okay, there we go. This Supreme Court decision upheld separate but equal. So the Jim Crow laws, the black codes, there again, segregation is legal. We're going to make everything segregated. Well, Plessy versus Ferguson, the gentleman Plessy, he was 7/8 white, which I know we shouldn't break it down like that, but he was 7/8 white, 1/8 black. He was riding in a train car for whites only, and they asked him to move. He didn't want to move because he said, I deserve to be here. And so he was arrested. Well, his court case was taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld that decision. So upheld the decision that separate but equal is constitutional. Now, once we start getting more in depth into the black codes and the Jim Crow laws, especially the Civil Rights Act, we're going to find that even though the Supreme Court decision upheld separate but equal, we're going to find that things were not equal. I mean, the schools weren't, the way they were treated weren't. So we're going to see that it goes back to the Constitution, the Supreme Court, in 1964. And in 1964, they have the Civil Rights Act. And then it was determined that separate but equal is not constitutional. So it took almost, 60 years, 65 years to reverse this decision. And so there we have it. These are our 11 vocabulary words about Reconstruction. And there again, Reconstruction is the time period right after the Civil War up until 1877. And so tomorrow we're going to look more at the 3 amendments of Reconstruction. So the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments. If you have any questions, let me know.